What would you do if you were in the same circumstances with the characters in the following stories? We would very love to know, and you could share it below under the comment sections. Now, let the stories unfold.
The steakhouse was silent, but the air felt like glass about to shatter. When Leo Moretti dropped his silver fork, the sound echoed like a gunshot. He wasn't looking at his dinner. He was looking at the bruised wrist of the woman at the next table and the man screaming in her face. The atmosphere inside L'Artusi in Manhattan was usually one of hushed luxury, the sound of clinking crystal and the soft hum of deals being brokered over vintage Bordeaux. But tonight, the ambiance was being shredded by Jackson Miller, a mid-level venture capitalist with a high-end suit and a low-end soul. "Do you have any idea how much that dress cost, Cassidy?" Jackson hissed, his voice rising past the point of a private argument. Cassidy sat motionless, her hands folded in her lap. A small splash of red wine had stained the hem of her silk slip dress, an accident caused by Jackson's own expansive gesturing. She didn't look up. She knew that looking up invited the fire. "I'm sorry, Jackson. I'll take it to the cleaners first thing tomorrow," she whispered. "You're damn right you will," he snapped, leaning in so close his forehead nearly touched hers. The smell of bourbon on his breath was suffocating. "You're a walking disaster. I bring you out to a place like this, and you embarrass me. Look at me when I'm talking to you." At the table directly to their left, separated only by a narrow aisle and a decorative ferns, sat a man who seemed to belong to a different century. Dominic Valley, known to the Department of Justice as the Ghost of Brooklyn, was peeling a pear with a pocket knife. His suit was charcoal, his shirt a crisp, lethal white. He was dining alone, a rare occurrence for a man of his stature, but he preferred the solitude of L'Artusi on Tuesdays. Dominic's eyes, as cold and gray as the Atlantic in winter, flicked toward Cassidy. He noticed things others didn't. He saw the way she flinched when Jackson reached for his wine. He saw the faint, yellowing bruise peeking out from under her gold watch. "I said, look at me!" Jackson's palm slammed onto the table. The vibrations sent a butter knife skittering onto the floor. The restaurant went dead silent. The maitre d' started to move forward, then hesitated. Jackson Miller was a regular who spent thousands. He was a preferred guest. "I want to go home," Cassidy said, her voice trembling. Jackson laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a jagged whisper that carried perfectly in the silenced room. "Oh, we're going home. All right. And the second we walk through that door, you're dead. You hear me? You're absolutely dead." Cassidy's face went bone white. She knew it wasn't a figure of speech. Dominic Valley set his knife down. The blade clicked against the china. He didn't call for the check. He didn't look at Jackson. He simply looked at Cassidy and spoke in a voice that was smooth, cultured, and terrifyingly calm. "Signorina," Dominic said, "is this man bothering you?" Jackson spun around, his face flushed with liquid courage and ego. "Mind your own business, pal. Keep your eyes on your own plate before I—" Jackson stopped. He finally looked at the man he was addressing. He saw the Patek Philippe on the wrist, the tailored cut of a suit that cost more than Jackson's car, and more importantly, he saw the two large men in dark overcoats who had suddenly appeared from the shadows of the bar to stand behind Dominic's chair. "Before you what, Mr. Miller?" Dominic asked. He knew the name. He knew every name in the room. "You were explaining what happens when you get home. I found the narrative unfinished." The bravado drained out of Jackson's face, replaced by a sickly, gray pallor. He recognized Dominic now. Everyone who read the Post or whispered in the back rooms of Wall Street knew the Valley name. They were the family that owned the piers, the unions, and the very ground L'Artusi was built on. It was just a lover's quarrel," Jackson stammered, his hands shaking as he reached for his jacket. "We were just leaving. Come on, Cassidy." He reached out to grab Cassidy's arm, his fingers digging into the soft flesh of her bicep. "Let go of her," Dominic said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "She's my girlfriend," Jackson hissed, a final, pathetic spark of defiance flickering. "You can't just—" One of Dominic's men, a mountain of a man named Rocco, stepped forward. He didn't touch Jackson. He simply leaned over the table, his shadow engulfing the smaller man. Jackson's grip on Cassidy loosened instantly. "Sit down, Jackson," Dominic commanded. Jackson fell back into his chair like his legs had turned to water. Cassidy remained frozen, her eyes wide, darting between the man who terrorized her and the monster who had just stepped in to save her. Dominic stood up. He walked the 3 steps around the divider and stood beside Cassidy. He offered her a linen handkerchief. "You've dropped a tear, Signorina. It's a waste of a beautiful face." She took the cloth with a trembling hand. "Thank you," she whispered. Dominic turned his gaze to Jackson. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I don't like loud noises when I'm eating, Mr. Miller, and I particularly dislike men who make threats they intend to keep. It's untidy." "I didn't mean it, I swear," Jackson pleaded. "It was just talk. Is that so?" Dominic reached out and gently took Cassidy's hand, turning her wrist upward to reveal the bruise. Did she do this to herself? Did she talk herself into a hematoma? The restaurant was a gallery of statues. No one breathed. Dominic pulled out a sleek, black smartphone and tapped the screen. "Rocco," Dominic said, eyes locked on Jackson. "Mr. Miller here works for Stratton and Associates, yes? I believe we hold the lease on their Midtown offices. And I believe the chairman owes me a favor regarding that SEC investigation." Jackson's eyes bulged. "Please, don't. I'll lose everything. You lost everything the moment you thought your hands were meant for hitting instead of holding," Dominic said. He looked at Cassidy. "Do you have somewhere safe to go, Cassidy?" "No," she breathed. "The apartment is in his name. My family is in Seattle. I have nowhere." Dominic felt a strange, unfamiliar tug in his chest. He lived in a world of violence, but it was a disciplined violence, a violence with rules. This was chaos. This was cruelty. "You do now," Dominic said. He looked at Jackson one last time. "You are going to leave. You will go to your apartment, pack a single bag, and you will be out of this city by midnight. If I see your name on a New York census tomorrow morning, or if you ever contact this woman again, I will stop being polite. Do you understand?" Jackson didn't wait. He scrambled out of the booth, nearly tripping over his own feet, and bolted for the door without looking back. Dominic turned back to Cassidy. She was shaking, the adrenaline finally crashing. "You don't have to go with him," Dominic said, his voice softening, "but you can't stay here." "Who are you?" she asked, her voice a fragile thread. "A man who appreciates a quiet dinner," Dominic replied, offering his arm, "and someone who is about to change your life, if you'll let me." The drive from the shattered remains of Cassidy's dignity at Lartusi to the rolling hills of Westchester was conducted in a silence so thick it felt tangible. The interior of Dominic Valley's bespoke Maybach smelled of aged cedar, expensive leather, and the faint metallic tang of power. Cassidy leaned her forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the jagged silhouette of the Manhattan skyline retreat into a blur of gray and gold. Beside her, Dominic was a study in predatory stillness. He didn't fidget, he didn't check his watch. He simply existed in the space, his presence expanding to fill every corner of the vehicle. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low, melodic rumble that seemed to vibrate in Cassidy's very marrow. "You are safe now, Cassidy. I want you to understand the weight of those words. In this car, and behind the gates we are approaching, the name Jackson Miller no longer carries the power to make you flinch." "You don't even know me," Cassidy whispered, her voice cracking. "Why would you do this? Men like you don't just rescue people for nothing." Dominic turned his head, his gray eyes catching the flash of a passing streetlight. "I am many things, Signorina, but I am not a man of nothing. I saw a debt being accrued in that restaurant, a debt of cruelty. I simply chose to settle the account. Consider it a hobby." When the car finally slowed, it wasn't at a house, but a fortress. The Valley Estate was a sprawling neo-Gothic manor hidden behind 15-foot iron gates and a phalanx of weeping willows that looked like silent sentinels. As the gates hummed open, Cassidy felt a renewed spike of adrenaline. This wasn't a refuge, it was an empire. The front doors were opened by a woman with silver hair pulled into a bun so tight it looked painful. "This is Mrs. Rossi," Dominic said, stepping out and offering a hand to Cassidy. "She has been with my family since before I could walk. She will see to your needs. Mrs. Rossi, please prepare the East Wing. And call Dr. Eris. I want that wrist examined and documented." "Documented?" Cassidy asked, pausing on the marble threshold. "Evidence is only useful if it's preserved," Dominic replied smoothly. "Go, rest. We will speak in the morning." The next 2 weeks were a surreal blur of luxury and isolation. Cassidy's world shrank to the size of the estate, but it was a world far larger than the cramped apartment she had shared with Jackson. Her suite was draped in silks and velvets. Her bathroom featured a tub carved from a single block of Carrara marble. Every morning, a fresh wardrobe appeared in her dressing room, pieces from Bergdorf Goodman, labels like the Row and Saint Laurent, all in her exact size. Yet, the luxury felt heavy. Every time she walked into the gardens, she noticed the shadows. Rocco, the behemoth from the restaurant, was never more than 50 paces away. He didn't speak, but his eyes were always moving, scanning the perimeter. She was being protected, yes, but she was also being watched. Dominic was a ghost during the day, but at 8 p.m. sharp, he expected her at the dining table. These dinners were the most confusing part of her new life. He was a perfect gentleman, erudite, witty, and seemingly fascinated by her thoughts on architecture and art. He didn't treat her like a victim. He treated her like a guest of honor. "My father used to say that a man's worth is measured by the quality of the people at his table," Dominic said one evening, swirling a vintage Barolo in his glass. "Tonight, the stock is high." "And what about the people not at your table, Dominic?" Cassidy asked, emboldened by the wine. "The ones I hear you talking about in your study? The ones who owe you?" "Jackson told me stories about the Valley family. He said you were the reason the Longshoremen's Union collapsed in 22. Dominic's expression didn't change, but his eyes grew infinitesimally darker. Jackson Miller was a man who mistook gossip for gospel. "I am a businessman, Cassidy. I stabilize environments. Sometimes, stabilization requires a firm hand. Is that not what I did for you?" She had no answer for that. He had stabilized her life by obliterating her past. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Dominic was in the city, and the house felt cavernous and cold. A courier arrived at the gate, not one of Dominic's usual men, but a third-party service. He left a small, nondescript manila envelope addressed to the lady of the house. Rocco intercepted it, but Cassidy happened to be in the foyer. "It's for me, Rocco. I'll take it." The big man hesitated, then handed it over. Cassidy retreated to the library, her heart hammering against her ribs. Inside was a single, charred photograph. It was a picture of her and Jackson from a New Year's Eve party 3 years ago. They looked happy, or at least, she looked like she was trying to be. On the back, written in a frantic, jagged scrawl that she recognized as Jackson's, were words that chilled her blood. "He didn't save you because he's a hero, Cass. He saved you because of the Red merger deal. I was the only one who saw the offshore accounts. He didn't want you safe. He wanted me silenced, and his biggest rival's lead analyst in his pocket. Ask him about the North Brooklyn waterfront. You aren't a guest, you're a trophy of war. Get out before he finishes what I started." Cassidy dropped the photo as if it had turned into a viper. The Red merger acquisition had been the white whale of Jackson's firm for 18 months. It involved a massive strip of industrial land that was being rezoned for luxury high-rises, a multi-billion-dollar shift in the New York landscape. Was it all a lie? The rescue at the restaurant, the concern for her wrist, the silk dresses, was she just a tactical move in a chess game she didn't even know she was playing? She spent the rest of the afternoon pacing the library, her mind spinning. She looked at the books on the shelves, leather-bound classics, histories of Rome, treatises on Machiavelli. "It is better to be feared than loved," the books seemed to whisper. When the front doors finally opened and Dominic stepped in, shaking the rain from his coat, Cassidy didn't wait for him to reach the stairs. She stood at the top of the grand staircase, the charred photo gripped in her white-knuckled hand. "Dominic!" she called out, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. He looked up, his face softening for a brief second before he saw the expression on hers. He handed his coat to Mrs. Rossi and began to ascend the stairs, his footsteps measured and heavy. "You look troubled, Cassidy," he said, stopping 2 steps below her so he had to look up. It was a rare moment of physical subordination. "Tell me about Red Merger," she snapped, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and fury. "Tell me why Jackson thinks you used me to take down his firm. Tell me if I'm just a line item on your balance sheet." Dominic didn't look away. He didn't blink. He simply reached out and took the photo from her hand, his fingers brushing hers. The contact felt like an electric shock. He looked at Jackson's writing, a small, cynical smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Jackson always was a better storyteller than he was a man," Dominic said quietly. "We have much to discuss, Cassidy, but you should know one thing before we begin. I have never needed a woman to win a war. I win wars because I am willing to do what other men are not." He gestured toward the study. "Come, let's see if your heart can handle the truth, or if you'd prefer the comfort of Jackson's lies." The air in Dominic's study was thick with the scent of old paper and the lingering smoke of a single, expensive cigar. Dominic sat behind his desk, not like a businessman, but like a judge. He laid the charred photograph on the green leather blotter between them. The silence stretched, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock that sounded like a countdown. "The Red Merger deal," Dominic began, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. It was a play for the North Brooklyn waterfront, 300 acres of the most valuable undeveloped land in the Western Hemisphere. Your boyfriend's firm was the gatekeeper. Jackson was the man who held the keys to the environmental impact reports that could have stalled my family's development for a decade. Cassidy felt a cold sickness wash over her. "So it was all a game. You knew we'd be at Lartusi. You knew he'd snap. You waited for the moment to look like a savior so you could justify destroying him and taking the land." Dominic stood up, walking toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the darkened estate. "I knew Jackson was a violent drunk, yes. I knew he was embezzling from the Red Merger accounts to cover his gambling debts in Atlantic City. I had enough leverage to bury him months ago, Cassidy. I didn't need a scene at a steakhouse to take his land. I could have taken it with a single phone call to the district attorney." He turned back to her, his silhouette framed by the lightning that suddenly flickered in the distance. "I didn't step in because of a land deal. I stepped in because I watched a man treat a diamond like a piece of gravel. I took the land because it was profitable. I took him down because I enjoyed it. But I brought you here because I wanted to see if you were more than just his victim." "And what am I now?" Cassidy shouted, her voice breaking. "Your property? Your project? You bought my clothes? You pay for my food? You guard my door? I just traded one cage for a more expensive one." "The difference," Dominic said, stepping into the light, his eyes burning with a sudden, fierce intensity, "is that in this house, you have the power to burn the cage down. I don't want a subordinate, Cassidy. I have 1,000 men who will die on my command. I wanted a woman who could look at a man like me and not blink." Before she could respond, the heavy oak doors of the study were thrown open. Rocco entered, his breathing heavy, his suit jacket discarded to reveal a shoulder holster. "Boss, we've got a situation. The O'Malley crew from Queens. They've breached the outer perimeter. They've got Jackson with them." Dominic's face transformed. The sophisticated host vanished, replaced by the ghost of Brooklyn. His jaw set into a line of granite. "Jackson? The coward actually found a spine?" "He didn't find a spine, he found a debt," Rocco growled. "He owes the O'Malleys $3 million. He told them if they help him snatch the girl, he can use her as leverage to get you to sign over the North Brooklyn titles. They've got 2 SUVs coming up the main drive." Dominic didn't hesitate. He reached into the top drawer of his desk and pulled out a sleek, silver, .45 caliber pistol. He checked the magazine with a practiced, lethal click. "Cassidy, get behind the desk. Stay low. Rocco, tell the boys to use the suppressors. I don't want the neighbors calling the police. I want the O'Malleys in the ground." "Dominic, wait!" Cassidy cried out, but the air was already exploding. The sound of glass shattering echoed from the foyer below, followed by the muffled thwip-thwip of silenced gunfire. The violence was surgical and terrifyingly efficient. Cassidy huddled behind the heavy mahogany desk, her hands over her ears. She heard shouting Jackson's voice, high and hysterical, screaming her name. "Cassidy, I know you're in there. Come out and we can end this. He's a monster, Cass. He's going to kill us both." Dominic looked at her, his thumb flicking the safety off. "Is he right, Cassidy? Am I the monster?" She looked at the man who had given her silk and safety, then thought of the man outside who had given her bruises and fear. "He's the one who brought guns to a house where I was sleeping," she whispered. "He's the one who doesn't care if I die in the crossfire." Dominic nodded once. He stepped out of the study and into the hallway. Cassidy couldn't stay hidden. She crept to the doorway, watching as the grand staircase became a battlefield. Below, two men in leather jackets lay slumped over the marble fountain. Jackson was standing near the front door, looking frantic, holding a small handgun with trembling hands. Beside him stood a tall, scarred man, Liam O'Malley. "Valley!" O'Malley yelled, his voice echoing. "Give us the girl and the signatures, and we leave. Keep 'em, and we burn this mansion with you inside." Dominic stood at the top of the stairs, perfectly calm. "Liam, you always were a poor mathematician. You brought 6 men to a house guarded by 20. And you brought a dead man." He gestured to Jackson, "to negotiate for a life." "I'm not dead!" Jackson shrieked, aiming his gun at the stairs. "I'm taking back what's mine!" Jackson fired. The bullet went wide, splintering a priceless Ming vase near Dominic's head. Dominic didn't even flinch. He raised his own weapon and fired a single shot. Jackson Miller fell back, a neat red hole appearing in his shoulder. He collapsed to the floor, wailing, his gun skittering away. Liam O'Malley went to raise his weapon, but 4 red laser dots suddenly appeared on his chest. Dominic's men had closed the circle. "Take them to the basement," Dominic commanded, his voice cold as the grave. "I'll deal with Mr. O'Malley personally. As for Jackson, hand him over to the Jersey Docks crew. He wanted to know about the waterfront. Let him see the bottom of it." The men were dragged away, Jackson's pleas fading into the distance until the house was silent once more. Dominic turned back to Cassidy, who was standing in the shadows of the hallway, trembling. He walked to her, smelling of cordite and rain. He didn't touch her. He waited. "It's over," he said. "He won't hurt you again. No one will." Cassidy looked at the blood on the marble floor, then at the man before her. She realized the truth then. There was no going back to her old life. That world was gone, burned away by Jackson's ego and Dominic's ambition. "You said I could leave," she said softly. "You said the gates were open." "They are," Dominic replied. "Rocco is waiting with the car. You have the money, the clothes, the freedom. You can go to Seattle. You can start over." Cassidy looked at the silver gun in his hand, then at the steady, unwavering gaze of a man who would do anything to protect what was his. She reached out, her fingers closing over the cold metal of the pistol's barrel, gently pushing it down. "I don't want to start over," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I want to be the woman who doesn't blink." Dominic's expression didn't break, but a spark of something pride, perhaps, or love lit up his gray eyes. He took her hand and brought it to his lips, kissing the knuckles he had once seen bruised. "Then welcome home, Cassidy Valley," he whispered. "The world is ours, and I promise you, it will never be quiet again." In a world of shadows, love isn't about being safe. It's about finding the one person worth the danger. If you enjoyed this journey into the heart of the Valley Empire, make sure to hit that like button and share this story with someone who loves a dark romance. Subscribe for more tales of power, passion, and betrayal. Would you have stayed with Dominic or taken the chance to run? Let us know in the comments.